Thank you, Tarzan. Thank you, New York. Thank you, consciousness. Thank you, Apple iPhones. Thank you, bombs. Thank you, hand creams. Thank you, watermelon. Thank you, vanilla beans. Thank you, Disney. Thank you, St. Mark's. Thank you, fine people. Thank you, money. Thank you, soberness. Thank you, sex. Thank you, gongcha. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, bikes. Thank you, walking. Thank you, music. Thank you, beach. Thank you, mountains. Thank you, nerves. Thank you, internet. Thank you, Instagram. Thank you, glamour. Thank you, Chinese culture. Thank you, community. Thank you, prayers. Thank you, adoration. Thank you, bliss. Thank you, tears. Thank you, poets. Thank you, leather bags. Thank you, French tips. Thank you, Kodak Black. Thank you, memories. Thank you, condoms. Thank you, Nen Golden. Thank you, rage. Thank you, critiques. Thank you, parents. Thank you, home. Thank you, sushi. Thank you, Taiwan. Thank you, Lucian Smith. Thank you, owls. Thank you, mugs. Thank you, warmth. Thank you, cold. Thank you, gold. Thank you, love. Thank you, movies. Thank you, cinema. Thank you, ocean. Thank you for another chance at life. Thank you, steam. Thank you, medication. Thank you, fish. Thank you, Balenciaga. Thank you, books. Thank you, paint. Thank you, faith. Thank you, names. Thank you, hair. Thank you, cameras. Thank you, mirrors. Thank you, Grimm Brothers. Thank you, glory. Thank you, locks. Thank you, concealer. Thank you, boyfriends. Thank you, ribbons. Thank you, heirlooms. Thank you, diners. Thank you, Hillary Duff. Thank you, Riverside. Thank you, Spotify. Thank you, fame. Thank you, lychee. Thank you, lashes. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, croissants. Thank you, boots. Thank you, scanner. Thank you, scent. Thank you, index. Thank you, Uma Thurman. Thank you, MoMA. Thank you, talent. Thank you, Tumblr. Thank you, sunshine. Thank you, unity. Thank you, storm. Thank you, culture. Thank you, planes. Thank you, Zell. Thank you, records. Thank you, archive. Thank you, YouTube. Thank you, breath. Thank you, straws. Thank you, water. Thank you, oil. Thank you, piercings. Thank you, Japan. Thank you, privilege. Thank you, luck. Thank you, manifesting. Thank you, Cartier. Thank you, makeup. Thank you, shame. Thank you, dinosaurs. Thank you, fat. Thank you, malls. Thank you, bobas. Thank you, shoes. Thank you, boobs. Thank you for giving me another chance at life. Thank you for getting. Thank you, greatness. Thank you, destiny. Thank you, travel. Thank you, collecting. Thank you, toilet paper. Thank you, Steve Jobs. Thank you, bowls. Thank you, beds. Thank you, restrooms. Thank you, pillows. Thank you, forgiveness. Thank you, radiator. Thank you, backyard. Thank you, dreaming. Thank you, bonfires. Thank you, pools. Thank you, soap. Thank you, museums. Thank you, stones. Thank you, opera. Thank you, milk. Thank you, discipline. Thank you, Ruth Asawa. Thank you, gardens. Thank you, activists. Thank you, itinerary. Thank you, principal. Thank you, plywood. Thank you, Canal Street. Thank you, Chanel. Thank you, salt. Thank you, pets. Thank you, gratefulness. Thank you, love. Thank you, security. Thank you, Arthur Jaffa. Thank you, play. Thank you, jazz. Thank you, groomers. Thank you, games. Thank you, chefs. Thank you, wire. Thank you, Chinatown. Thank you, strangers. Thank you, samples. Thank you, studs. Thank you, funeral. Thank you, chopsticks. Thank you, montages. Thank you, moonlight. Thank you, wishes. Thank you, performances. Thank you, magic. Thank you, at another chance at life. Thanking everything. Thanking everyone. Thank you for death. Thank you for dying, but also thank you for living. Thank you for having lived. Thank you for living. Thank you for giving me life. Thank you for teaching me faith. Thank you for giving me doubt. Thank you for pushing me and holding me down. Thank you for transportation. Thank you for lunch. Thank you, summer, fall, spring, and winter. Thank you for the great music. Thank you for the name. Thank you for our origin. Thank you, history. Thank you, lineage. Thank you, wisdom. Thank you for giving me your gold ring. Thank you for my tongue. Thank you, language. Thank you, legends. Thank you, stories. Thank you, culture. Thank you, customs. Thank you for keeping your old photos. Thank you for keeping my old photos. Thank you for giving me sisters. Thank you, sisters. Thank you, home. Thank you, solidarity. Thank you, trauma. Thank you, forgiveness. Thank you, restart. Thank you, change. Thank you, acceptance. Thank you, wonder. Thank you, laughter. Thank you, love. And lastly, thank you, family.